Welcome to this webinar on guaranteed hours, which forms part of a series accompanying the TUC's Great Jobs Agenda. In these webinars, we want to discuss how unions can campaign, organise and negotiate to ensure that all working people get better jobs, better pay and better working conditions. Today's session is going to focus on the issue of guaranteed hours and how we can end the abuse of 0 hours contracts and short hours contracts. We very much hope that you will join in and participate in this webinar. If you look below the video screen, you'll see that there are links to different questions and polls. And if you have any questions you'd like me to answer, please submit them and I'll do the very best I can at the end of this session to give you some answers. You'll also see that there's a chat area on the right side. Do say hello to other participants and have a chat amongst yourself during this session. But if you have a question for me, we'd be grateful if you could put that into the questions area, not in the chat session. So as I said at the outset, what we're going to be talking about today is the issue of guaranteed hours. But before I come on to talk a bit about what reps might consider doing in workplaces about these issues, I thought it'd be worth spending just a couple of minutes on why this is an important issue and why we as a trade union movement are campaigning for change. Now, according to official statistics, over 3 million people, that's 1 in 10 of the UK workforce, now face insecurity at work, be it because they're employed on a 0 hours contract, they're an agency worker, or they're part of the growing numbers of low paid self-employed. Now, if you were to believe everything that you read in the media, you would think that the growth in insecure work is primarily linked to new technology and gig economy type jobs. Of course, we all know that companies such as Uber and Deliveroo and TaskRabbit are growing. But what these statistics also show us is that the growth in insecure work has largely been found in more traditional forms of work, be it education, hospitality and social care. And perhaps unsurprisingly, insecurity is often most concentrated amongst those who already face labour market disadvantage, be it women, be it BME workers, be it those who already work in some of the poorest regions of the UK, where often insecure work is the only option available to them. Look, for example, at what's happened in the North East since 2011, where 2/3 of the new jobs created since that year have been insecure in some way or another. Now, employers would have us believe that the growth in 0 hours contracts, agency working and self-employment has provided individuals with flexibility and choice, but that's not what working people tell us. A recent poll commissioned by the TUC indeed showed that the vast majority of people on 0 hours contracts are not there by choice. They're there because it's the only option available to them. 66% report indeed that they would prefer to be on a guaranteed hours contract. And of course, it's not just simply 0 hours contract workers who face problems of insecurity when it comes to working hours. Many individuals working now in hospitality, in retail, and in other parts of the labour market are being given short hours contracts, which may guarantee them 5 or 8 hours work a week, often though they're expected to work many more hours each week, but those hours aren't guaranteed. And these individuals often face the same insecurity, the same financial problems as those on 0 hours contracts. Now, on the screen in front of you, you will see some quotes that working people have told the TUC in recent years about their working lives. What they have also told us is that working in insecure jobs means that they have very little choice of their working hours and are constantly at the beck and call of their employer, making it very difficult to organise childcare and their social life. Uncertainty over take-home pay also makes it very difficult for people to plan financially. And of course, I don't need to tell trade unionists that many who are in insecure work also miss out on basic workplace rights, including protection from unfair dismissal, which means they're much more vulnerable to being mistreated in the workplace. They also often lose out on pay. TUC analysis, for example, suggests that the average 0 hours contract worker earns 34% less per hour than an average employee. So this is why the TUC is campaigning for change. And if you want to find out more about the key asks that we are putting to the government on a daily basis for better, greater jobs in the UK, do go to the Great Jobs Agenda website on the TUC website. And there you'll see our asks for fair and decent pay, for guaranteed hours, for healthier workplaces, and perhaps most importantly, for better rights, including trade union rights, to ensure everybody in the workplace has a voice over the things which matter to them. But of course, it's not just the government that needs to act. Employers also have a responsibility to change their working practices. And for the rest of the session today, I'd like to look at some of the things that union reps might want to think about doing in your workplaces in order to press your employers to offer more guaranteed hours and better rights for everyone at work. A good starting point for any rep is to find out maybe how many and what types of different types of insecure contracts are being used in your workplace, and why your employer is using those different contracts. Now, often a right that people forget about as union reps is the right to information. If your union recognises you for the purposes of collective bargaining, recognises your union for the purposes of collective bargaining, you have the right to ask for information about the workforce and their pay and conditions. And you have a right to this information in order to ensure that you can engage in effective collective bargaining with your employer. So what can you do? Well, perhaps write to your employer asking them to give you regular updates about the numbers of zero-hours contract workers and short-hours contract workers in your workplace. Also ask them how many agency workers are employed, where they work, what type of jobs they do. You should also consider asking your employers to tell you about how much workers on insecure contracts get paid per hour and about their other terms and conditions of employment. Also, it may be a good idea to ask managers to explain to you why they use insecure contracts and whether they have considered or would consider moving towards more permanent employment in your workplace. Now, once you get this information, you can use it to help develop a plan to recruit and organise those insecure work in your workplace. It might, for example, be a good idea to identify reps who already work in teams where there are zero-hours contract workers or agency workers. And wherever possible, it's always great to assist and support those in insecure work to self-organise, to give them a stake in your union campaign. You can also use the information provided by the employer to build a campaign and bargaining asks for more guaranteed hours, better jobs within your workplace. But as I've already suggested, before beginning negotiations with employers, it's really important to gather the evidence, but also to talk to people in your workplace to identify those issues which are most important to them, those problems in the workplace that most affect people working around you. One idea might be to survey both your members and other workers in your workplace to ask them about their biggest concerns at work. You may also want to consider organising an open meeting, not only for union members, but also for the wider workforce. Such meetings demonstrate that the union is taking action and is concerned about the issues that concern people in your workplace. They can also provide a really good organising and recruitment opportunity for trade unions. Another thing that many unions have learned about insecure work is that many in insecure jobs often work erratic hours and unsocial hours. Unions are therefore developing their use of social media and communicating with people using email and text to ensure that everybody finds out about the union campaign and can get involved in it. Now, once you've gathered the evidence and you've prioritised the issues that are important in your workplace, it's a good idea to put together a claim to put to your employer. Asks can be varied, but they might, for example, include getting a commitment from your employer that they will not use zero-hours contracts or agency work in place of more permanent jobs. Also, our experience across the trade union movement is often individuals working on zero-hours contracts or as agency workers work relatively regular patterns, but their contracts don't guarantee them those hours. So you could ask employers after a period of time to provide those workers with guaranteed hours contracts which reflect their normal working practices. Another good idea when you're putting together an ask or a claim to your employer is to think about what other types of argument that might convince the business it's a good idea to move towards more permanent forms of employment, more guaranteed hours. The types of arguments used by unions are, for example, if the whole workforce is on insecure, irregular work, that often can have effect on the quality and continuity of service which is provided to customers. It can also affect team working. Individuals often aren't working alongside each other on a regular basis, which means they may not be as effective working together. And of course, we also know that heightened job insecurity has an impact on staff morale, staff motivation. If you're in an insecure contract, you're much more likely to be looking for another job which offers permanent guaranteed hours. If employers want to keep their workforce, therefore, there's a clear incentive to offer them better pay and more guaranteed hours. So moving on from the issue of guaranteed hours, another problem that we know that many in insecure workplaces experience is how hours are allocated. And it's a real concern that in some workplaces, managers use favoritism when deciding who to give hours to and how many hours that they will get. Working people also tell us that too often, if you're on a 0 hours contract or a short hours contract, you get very little notice of when you'll be expected to work. And you can also find that your hours are taken away very quickly also. A recent TUC poll, for example, showed that almost 3/4 of 0 hours contract workers had been offered work with less than 24 hours notice. And for 27%, they reported that this was a regular experience. 51% also said that they had had their hours cancelled with less than 24 hours notice. And perhaps one of the more worrying statistics also was the fact that 1/3 of those on 0 hours contracts said that they had been threatened by their manager that if they didn't accept a shift, they would lose out on future work. As a result, workers often feel that they're constantly at the beck and call of employers, making it impossible to plan their lives outside of the workplace. So again, what can you do? Well, it might be a good idea to survey members and other workers in your workplace to find out just how much notice they do get of shifts and when shifts are cancelled. And again, if your employer recognises your union, it's maybe a good idea to ask them to explain the system that they use for allocating hours, and ask them to give an explanation of the steps that they take to make sure they're not discriminating against women, against Black and ethnic minority workers, against young workers when they allocate those hours. You also maybe want to prepare a claim to the employer based on what workers in your workplace want. Maybe to agree a minimum notice period for when shifts will be allocated. And also perhaps asking your employer to agree that if shifts are cancelled at short notice, that staff will, as a very minimum, get paid their transport costs and any expenses they'd incurred. But more importantly, if possible, also get paid for the shift they should have done, but which has been taken away from them. Now, the last issue I'd like to look at in this session today is the issue of guaranteeing that everyone in the workplace gets the rights that they deserve. Because we know from talking to working people that the lack of guaranteed hours is not the only problem faced by those in insecure work. Many are also missing out on the basic rights that most of us take for granted. The recent poll commissioned by the TUC, for example, showed that many 0 hours contract workers miss out on basic entitlements at work. Only 12% said that they get sick pay. Only 7% said that they would receive redundancy pay if their work dries up. Amazingly, 2/5 said that they don't get any holiday pay, and nearly a half said they would never receive a written statement of terms and conditions. Now, as trade unionists, we know there are often many reasons why individuals miss out on rights in the workplace. People may not meet the legal tests to be an employee, and therefore they may lose out on their basic rights. Also, those people who work in irregular hours find that it's very difficult to accrue 2 years continuous service needed to qualify for unfair dismissal or redundancy pay rights. And of course, we know too many unscrupulous bosses out there are relying on people's uncertain employment status to tell people, oh, you've got no rights in the workplace, even though the legal reality might be very different. So what can we do about this issue? Well, again, it may be a good idea to carry out a survey of your members and of wider workers to check what actual benefits they receive in the workplace, whether they're getting sick pay, holiday pay, and a workplace pension. And also to ask them, what are the issues, what are the benefits that most would matter to them that they would most like to see in the workplace? And if you find that groups of workers are losing out on basic rights, it's always a good idea to consider putting together a collective grievance on behalf of a group of workers and trying to convince the employer to come to the bargaining table to sort those issues out. If the employer refuses, you can, of course, always resort to raising lots of individual grievances, which takes up HR managers' time. That's a good way of trying to incentivize the employer to negotiate around the issues. And unions, of course, always have a good track record in helping our members to enforce their rights. But what we're not always good about is remembering to publicise the wins that we secure for those in insecure jobs and other forms of work. But alongside helping people to enforce their rights, it's also a good idea maybe to put a claim to the employer. One suggestion might be to say to the employer, can we carry out a joint audit between the union and the employer to find out who's missing out on which rights in the workplace? You also may want to try to reach agreement with the employer in principle that regardless of a person's employment status, they nevertheless should get basic rights in the workplace, including holidays, occupational sick pay, and pensions. Even if individuals do miss out on the legal test for a particular right, there's nothing to stop unions from arguing that by treating all workers fairly, giving all workers basic benefits in the workplace helps workplace motivation, helps workplace loyalty, and also builds more successful competitive businesses. So that's just a run through of some of the types of things that unions might want to think about in trying to negotiate better jobs for those in insecure work. Many of these examples are already being run by unions in different workplaces, and unions are winning better rights for working people across the UK. And hopefully also this webinar has highlighted why the TUC rightly believes that guaranteed hours should be one of our priorities for our Great Jobs agenda as we go forward in the coming months. Now, I believe that some of you have been sending in questions as we've gone through the webinar, and my colleague Anna is going to read out some of those, and hopefully we'll find some answers for you.
Okay, so we've had a question from Gary. Are there any studies on the health risks associated with irregular and unpredictable hours of work as opposed to working a set shift pattern? Gary's in the marine industry that works a taxi rank type system 24/7, resting when possible. Although minimum rest periods are specified, there is no pattern.
I believe the HSE has done some research in what the impact has been the growth of insecure work on working people, but certainly union reps tell the TUC on a regular basis, if you're in an insecure job, you don't know where your next pay package is coming from, you don't know how much pay you're going to take home. That can be a very stressful and anxious experience for individuals, which again may be why it's a good idea when health and safety reps are talking to their employers about risks within the workplace. It's a good idea to put job insecurity onto that list and get employers seriously to engage with that as an issue.
Next question from Leslie. One of the issues I see with zero hours contracts is that the employer can have the threat of not offering any hours as a weapon. For example, if you turn down a shift, you're not offered any more. Is there anything that can be done to prevent this?
Well, we know all too often this is a real problem for working people. As I talked about earlier on, the TUC poll showed that nearly a third of people on 0 hours contracts experience exactly that practice. Now, often people in insecure jobs are nervous about raising a complaint with the employer because they worry they might lose their job. So one good thing that union might want to do is carry out a survey, pull together anonymised evidence from workers to present that to the employer to say, look, this is what's happening in the workplace. This is having a serious impact on our members and other workers. That's why we need proper notice for individuals before they're allocated shifts, and also proper remuneration for individuals who suddenly find that their work is being cancelled. Also, if you find in your workplace there are particular groups who are finding that they're losing out on hours, be it part-time women workers or be it BME workers, the union might want to consider seeing whether there's grounds for a discrimination claim or raising a grievance on that basis within the workplace. Any more questions, Anna?
Yeah, next question from Jeremy. Irregular hours in the way of no set pattern, but with a full-time contract. How is this fair?
Well, often we know, it's not just simply those who are on a 0 hours contract or a short hours contract who find that they're constantly at the beck and call of their employer. We know that we have a problem of long working hours within the UK. Employers often expecting people to be available outside of normal working hours. Again, it's a good idea to encourage members to monitor what their working hours are, to see if they're working excessive hours, and also to see whether workers are getting their proper breaks, their proper rest periods during the working day, and also getting enough rest between working days. And if you go to the TUC website, you'll find a really excellent guide on people's basic rights to rest breaks in order, and we should check that members in our workplaces are getting the basic rights to which they're entitled.
A question from Emily. And I think this is probably a question for everyone on the webinar as well as Hannah. It would be interesting to hear how others may deal with short notice cancellations of shifts or jobs, especially within a gig economy where the bulk of work might be from one-off jobs consisting of a few days at a time.
It would be really interesting to hear from everybody who's involved in the webinar how we might deal with this as an issue, because in some senses, Emily's question goes right to the heart of the problem. Too often, those in insecure contracts find that they may be offered work one week but get no work at all the next week, which is really one of the main reasons why we as trade unions are campaigning for everyone to get guaranteed hours, to ensure that employers don't just simply place all the risk on the worker, but that they plan ahead. They think about how many hours we're likely to need work input at the beginning of the week, and how do we allocate that work fairly between our staff so everyone gets a decent income, everyone gets decent hours. But again, as I've mentioned already, many individuals may feel nervous about raising an individual grievance about these types of practices. So it's a good idea for unions to gather information, carry out a survey, anonymise the data and put that to the employer. So they have to answer why they're allocating hours so unfairly, and to give a reason or to explain why that's justified when it has such a serious impact on people's working lives.
And there's another a question from Shell. You might have already answered this, Hannah, just now, saying we request this, but they keep putting us off or give old information. How can we press them to give us this information?
Well, there are two ways of doing this. If you're in the public sector, you may be able to submit a freedom of information request, which employers have a legal obligation to respond to, and that's a public process. But in all workplaces as well, as I mentioned at the beginning, as recognised trade unions, we have the right to receive information from employers to ensure that we can engage in effective collective bargaining. And that is a legal right to which we can enforce. You can make a complaint to the Central Arbitration Committee, the CAC, who will investigate whether the employer has disclosed the relevant information and can make an order requiring the employer to provide you with the relevant information, which will include up-to-date data about the workforce. Often unions find that simply submitting a complaint to the CAC is enough to get the employer into action and to deliver the information that you need. And certainly we have seen in recent years the numbers of complaints being made by unions to the CAC has gone up. and that actually hopefully is having a real impact on employers, genuine conversations with employers. So do think about that. You'll see that we're putting up a guide alongside this webinar today, and that will show you a link how to get to the CAC website and to find guidance on the right to disclosure of information. Okay, thank you very much for your participation in the webinar. It's been great to have you here today, and do join us for our next webinar, which will take place on the 24th of January, Wednesday the 24th of January at 2:30. And that webinar is going to be looking at the highly topical issue of where is our NHS heading, and that webinar will be organised by Matt Dykes. So look forward to seeing you again then, and do please tune in to future webinars on the TUC's Great Jobs Agenda. Thank you.